Tonight, we're going to take a slow, gentle journey into the past. You'll learn the story of one of the most ordinary objects in your life, an object so common it rarely crosses your mind. Yet, it has traveled through centuries, across empires, through scandals, revolutions, and rituals. It is the fork. So, close your eyes, take a deep breath, feel your body soften, and let's begin part 1. Origins in antiquity. Before the polished cutlery in your drawer, before stainless steel or silver, or even dining tables as we know them, there were fingers. For thousands of years, humans ate with their hands, and still do in many cultures. Our fingers, sensitive, precise, intuitive, were the original utensils. In fact, eating with them is not primitive, it's deeply human, but eventually we began creating tools to help us cook and eat. The spoon was one of the first. It's easy to see why cupping liquid or grains needed a curved bowl. The knife came next, a tool for cutting and protection, but also for dining. But the fork, the humble pronged tool, has a curious beginning. The earliest versions of the fork appeared in ancient Persia over 1,500 years ago. But these weren't dining utensils, they were cooking tools, two-pronged, long-handled, used for lifting meats from pots or flipping them over flames. Imagine a bustling kitchen, clay walls and open fires. A cook perhaps working over a spit, using a metal fork to pull lamb from the coals. That's where it began. The idea that this tool, born of practicality and fire, might one day rest beside our plates was still a distant dream. Part 2. A scandal in Byzantium. Let's move forward to the 11th century, to the glittering halls of the Byzantine Empire, where marble palaces met golden churches and theology mixed with opulence. Here, the fork took its next great step and sparked its first scandal. A Byzantine princess, Theodora Anna Ducaina, traveled west to marry Domenico Selvo, a Venetian doge. In her luggage, she brought silks, spices, and tiny golden forks. To the Venetian court, these delicate tools were baffling. At banquets, she used them gracefully, avoiding contact with the food entirely. In a culture where eating with one's hands was the norm, even among nobility, this act was seen not as elegant, but as arrogant. Religious leaders condemned the practice. Some claimed that using a fork was vanity, an insult to God's design. After all, hadn't He given humans fingers for eating? Theodora's fork became more than just a tool. It became a symbol of foreignness, of pride, of changing customs. But as with many symbols, it carried power. And despite the outrage, something curious happened. The fork began to spread quietly, subtly among aristocrats and royals who saw not scandal but sophistication. Part 3. The French Fork Revolution. Centuries passed, Europe changed, trade routes expanded, empires rose and fell, and eventually, the fork found a new champion, France. In the late 16th century, King Henry III of France was seen using a fork during meals. Not in secret, not as novelty, but as etiquette. At this point, the fork had evolved from 2 prongs to 3, even 4. It was no longer a dainty ornament. It was functional. The French elite took notice. And when the French court adopted something, the rest of Europe soon followed. To use a fork was now not just clean, it was civilized. No longer just a cooking tool, it was a marker of refinement, grace, and control. The slow, delicate gestures of a fork matched the manners and poise expected of the upper class. And with France's cultural influence spreading across Europe, so too did the fork. Part 4. Industrial Evolution. Now we enter the era of steel, smoke and steam, the 18th and 19th centuries. The Industrial Revolution changed how we lived and how we dined. Factories could now mass-produce cutlery. What was once carved by hand from silver or gold could now be stamped, polished and sold cheaply. Suddenly, forks weren't just for kings. They were for clerks, for tailors, for school teachers and shopkeepers. Every home, however humble, could afford a set. In Victorian England, where manners became an art form, the forks variety exploded. There were forks for fish, forks for fruit, forks for oysters and dessert. The dining table became a stage, and the fork was a key player in the performance of social grace. Etiquette manuals instructed proper fork technique, depending on class and country. Should one hold it tines up or tines down? Was it acceptable to switch hands? Debates raged in parlors and print, further proof that the fork was no longer just a tool, but a symbol of how we see ourselves and how we wish to be seen. Part 5. Cultural variations. Still, not every culture embraced the fork. Across Asia, chopsticks reigned, and still do. In Japan and China, these slender sticks, with their own complex etiquette, served as precise extensions of the hand. In Ethiopia, injera bread, a soft, spongy flatbread, was and is used to scoop and cradle food, no cutlery needed. In India, parts of the Middle East, and elsewhere, eating with the hand remains a sacred act, one of connection, mindfulness, and tradition. And so we're reminded, the fork is not universal, it is one branch of many, a product of a specific cultural path. Its rise is fascinating, but not superior, just different. Part 6. The modern fork. By the 20th century, the fork was fully embedded in Western life. It traveled with colonizers, with immigrants, with trade. It found its way into school cafeterias, airplane meals, and hospital trays. We now use forks made from metal, plastic, even bamboo. There are disposable forks, travel forks, collapsible forks for campers and hikers. The design has changed little, but the material world around it has transformed. And still, we rarely think about it, which is what makes it so interesting, because often it's the quietest things, the ones we touch every day without noticing, that hold the deepest stories. Part 7. Symbol of civilization. For a time, Western scholars framed the fork as a symbol of civilization. The argument was simple. To eat with cutlery was refined. To eat with hands was primitive. But that idea is outdated. Civilization doesn't live in forks. It lives in culture, in care, in how we treat one another. Some of the most civilized meals in history have been eaten with fingers, shared communally, passed down through generations. The fork is not a measure of progress. It's a mirror, reflecting values of the time. In Europe, it mirrored the rise of personal space, hygiene, and class distinction. In other places, its absence reflects values of closeness, tradition, and spiritual connection. Part 8. Sleepy reflections. So tonight, when you think of the fork, don't just see a piece of metal, see the hands of Persian cooks turning meat in firelight, see the golden glint of Byzantine feasts. Hear the whispers in a Venetian court, scandalized by a woman and her fork. Feel the rustle of lace gloves in a French salon where etiquette was everything, and smell the coal smoke of a Victorian kitchen, where forks clattered beside teacups and puddings. Remember, everything has a history. Even the most mundane object has passed through time, through hands and homes and hearts. That fork in your drawer, it carries the weight of centuries. It is part of a great, quiet lineage of human invention, and you are part of that story too. Thank you for joining me on this slow journey through the history of something so small, yet so meaningful. Rest well tonight, and remember, even the tiniest things can carry the greatest stories.